Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. Or maybe not.
Ladies and gentlemen, Johnny Cash.
Yeah. Charlie, this is always a lot of fun for me. I always truly treasure any time I get a chance to sit down and talk to you. And every time I think we sit and discuss things for 30 minutes or an hour or after that, I come away with ideas for about 12 books. And I think that's the big difference between us is I write, law enforcement stories and kidnapping stories and drug dealers and thefts. And these are people that you hung out with. This was your life. This is not, you didn't, this came out of my twisted imagination. These stories come from your real background. And for those of you, I know many of you that are here know Charlie, you know his background. You're a Marine during Vietnam.
Hello.
Yes. Yeah. And you were also Mississippi Bureau of Investigation undercover agent for a number of years, and then a federal prosecutor. And am I leaving anything out?
Nope, you got it all covered.
All right. But I thought about that, as we're getting into the book, and I've got plenty of questions, don't worry, we've got plenty of questions to talk. But not a lot of writers up here that write, mysteries or thrillers or international intrigue. When they talk about getting shot at, they don't really know what it's like. But you, guess the question, you've been shot at numerous times. So you understand, you speak from authority.
Maybe not. No, I remember when I was going to Iraq, I'd volunteered for Iraq. When I was with the Department of Justice, one night we were making up our bed.
What were you doing for the Department of Justice?
I was attorney advisor to the Iraqi High Tribunal that tried Saddam Hussein and the high-level regime leaders like Chemical Ali. And I was an attorney advisor to them for the first tour. And the second tour, I was in charge of the DOJ unit that advised them. And the third tour, I was the justice attaché for Iraq. We were getting ready for bed here one night. And I said to Evelyn, my wife, I said, hey, remember DOJ had a memo asking for volunteers to go to Iraq? And as we were making up the bed, she said, oh, yeah. If you're interested in that, you ought to put in for it. And I said, well, I did. Oh, you good. Because you ought to do something if you really want to do it. So will they interview you later on? I said, well, they already have. And she said, well, good. When will you hear something back? And I said, well, I already have. I said, well, will they let you go? And I said, yeah, they will. Well, when will they send you? I said, in 30 days. So from now on, I have to be careful around the house when she says, oh, by the way.
So how many years were you doing that, where you were a liaison and you were overseas and you were in Iraq?
That was a total about 22 months. Let me see.
Yeah.
Can you still hear this? You can? You can't? Can you still hear this? Here we go.
Let's see if here, I'll just trade mine.
Oh, there we go. Ace has a good point. When writers write these various novels, it comes from these fantastic minds where they're creating people. And
also known occasionally just being full of shit, Charlie.
Well, maybe so too. But the thing about it, when I write, simply because of my experiences, oftentimes I don't have to create, I just have to remember. And then when I remember, I weave it and fictionalize it. So in Flashpoint, there's a point where, there's a point where Frank, the FBI agent, he's in Africa. He's being pursued. He's staggering through the night, they're after him. And he vaguely remembers thicket, best thing to do, hide in the thicket, and then, if somebody's approaching, I'll be able to hear them because of the noise. And I based that on, it was in Vietnam when I went out on two-man ambushes. And one night, when one of the Marines I took with me, we got on the ground, we edged back into the bushes, and the bush was just pressing down all around us. But we could face outward with our weapons, and we were watching a trail. And so that way, if any VC came across, we'd be able to open fire. Sometime during the night, maybe it was 2 in the morning, we hear footfalls somebody's running, jogging. It's behind us somewhere. And they're getting closer and closer and closer. And all of a sudden, they're right behind the bush we're in, and whoever it is stops. It's a VC for sure. It stops. It's right behind us on the other side of the bush. Of course, we're frozen. We can't do anything because we can't turn around with our weapons without making noise. The only way we could do that is crawl out from the bush and then turn around, but that'd make noise. So we're frozen, and behind us, we could almost hear breathing, not quite. And then we hear a metallic click, click. Oh man, you know that's his rifle sling, or maybe his safety on his rifle. We cringe, expecting a blast into us. After a little while, nothing happens. Then we hear a footfall, once or twice, and then more, and he moves away, and finally he's moving away, and we take a deep breath. Well, that's in Flashpoint, where Frank's in that bush, and sometime during the night, he hears voices and movement, and he lifts his head, and he hears people moving closer in the brush, and during the night, and all of a sudden he could tell somebody's just within a few feet of the bush he's under. He says, he hears the heavy breathing. It sounds like an animal on the hunt. And all of a sudden he hears a metallic click. And he freezes, and shiver runs up his spine. Well, see, I didn't have to make that up. I just had to remember, right? So the good thing about it is I just have to remember some things. The bad thing is I have to remember some things, and that ain't good.
So, Charlie, what did it's interesting. Was your first book Undercover Confessions? Was that the first book?
Yeah, the Undercover book.
So if you guys haven't read Confessions of an Undercover Agent, it's really fantastic, and it's the good old days or bad old days, depending on the perspective of the Dixie Mafia, a lot of stolen car rings, drug operations. You got to see this all. This was when you got into MBI. What years were you there when you were doing that?
Yeah, that was MBN. That was like in the mid-'70s to the early '80s. And
that was kind of Wild West kind of time, though, too.
It was totally Wild West, where oftentimes you work undercover and you work on the Dixie Mafia or this group or that group, and you don't have surveillance and you're not wearing a wire. And if anything goes wrong, you're out there on your line. So it's kind of like walking the tightrope, without high wire, without.
Well, as I was reading, you're very modest. You sometimes, I'm not going to let you do this. You sometimes gloss over this stuff. Oh yeah, I used to do that, whatever. But when I read it, when I came away with it, you had to be crazy to do this kind of stuff, because when you're like, oh, I was wearing a wire, and this guy would go into a town, pretend he was somebody else, and then have to infiltrate these gangs, befriend people, all the while living under an assumed name for weeks, months.
Hey! Somebody would tell me, watch out for Mike. Yeah. Of course, I'm Mike. Yeah. But he knows me as Rick. This guy knows me as Rick. Watch out for Mike. And I'll say, yeah, I heard about him. I heard he's tall and handsome and smart. I was telling somebody this the other day about one time some people I busted wanted to hire a hitman to kill me. And I found out about it through an informant. And I found out that the two people who wanted to hire a hitman were friends of somebody I'd busted, but they'd never met me. So I told the informant, well, tell them you know somebody to do it at a reasonable price, and then you introduce me as the hitman to kill me. I thought, no, boy, that'd be wonderful to pull that off. But the bad guys decided, not to follow up on it, which was good for everybody. But anyway, those experiences sometimes help you. Also, things from everyday life. So, who was it? Tom Dawson, here in Oxford. We were talking on the phone back about a month ago. No, I'm sorry, longer than that. Tom said, hey, you hear about the guy that was on death row? And they asked him if he had any last words to say. And the guy said, I sure do. This sure has been a lesson to me. And I said, oh, Tom, no, I've got to weave that into the book. I mean, really, in a good way. So in the book, if you read about Stick, who's a drug dealer but with a good heart, he's walking away from the cemetery. His uncle's talking to him, who's no good. Sheriff calls him over. Sheriff's this black man, is powerful, beloved by a lot of people, hated by the criminals, respected by everybody. The sheriff calls him over. Hey, Stick, what you doing talking to D-Rod? Oh, ain't nothing. D-Ron was trying to get him to run guns to Chicago. Ain't nothing. And Stick had told him to go stuff it. Ain't nothing. Sheriff looks at him and said, yeah, ain't nothing, Stick, like that time you got caught with that pistol when you were in high school. Hell, you were skinny, but you had an arm. Man, you could have made something of yourself. The community colleges probably would have drafted you, beefed you up. Man, you learned all of that when you got caught with the gun. Oh, it ain't nothing. But Stick has a sober look on his face. Sheriff looks at him like he's still trying to decide something. So finally the sheriff says, hey, Stick, I got a story to tell you. Yeah, what's that? Man on death row asked him if he had any last words to say. He said, yeah, sure do. The show been to listen to me. Stick said, huh? That true? Sheriff said, hell, I don't know. But I know there's a good lesson in that, Stick. Yeah, what's that? Some people only learn a lesson when it's too late. I don't want that to happen to you. You can still make something of yourself. Think about it. So then, sheriff drives off. Stick's riding away, and he looks in the rearview mirror. He looks at himself, and he's angry, and he's sad, and he's bitter. And he thinks, why can't I be the man I want to be? I don't like that. That came from an Ingmar Bergman movie, French movie. I love those old movies, and when I heard that, I thought, man, I need to use that in the line. So Stick's thinking, why can't I be the man I want to be?
Was that a film that was recommended to you by our late friend John Heilman, who brought a supreme amount of culture to this town?
Oh man, yeah, John Heilman, the ultimate literate man here.
I'm sure many of you guys knew John was, and that's how we got to be friends.
Oh yeah,
was through John, and John had these amazing stories too. I remember, I'll tell you a story real quick. As we were going down to, he wanted me to go with him to Calhoun City and have this conversation, kind of like what we're doing now, and to talk about these stories, and interview John about his book. I guess it was Midnight to Guntown, which is, again, two of the best books written about Mississippi crime. John's book, your book, Undercovers, Confessions of an Undercover Agent, just fantastic. But he said, I know you write about the Dixie Mafia and you're interested in that. I think you'll be interested to meet some people down there. And so he came in, and there was a guy that I think you might have been there, who had been a fence for the Dixie Mafia. I can't say his name. I guess I can't say his name, but he walked up. Can we say, I don't know if we can say his name?
Yeah, we can say his name.
Poppy.
Yeah, Poppy, Forrest Pope.
Yeah.
Forrest Pope.
And he came in, he had gold on every finger, chains or whatever. And John's book was not cheap. I think it was $45. I mean, it was a big, thick book. He came out, and he said, and John apologized, said, I'm sorry, Poppy, these things are $45. You don't have to buy a book. He said, oh, I'll just take 5 of them. And he pulled out the biggest wad of cash I'd ever seen and put that money down or whatever.
Yeah,
but I love. So let's transition a little bit, because you've talked so much, and I know you may be tired of talking about your undercover work and your time over in Iraq and everything you've done. Why did you decide, you've got all these amazing stories, all this incredible background. Why'd you want to write a novel? What turned you on to writing fiction when you had so much nonfiction in you? What was the inspiration for that?
That's a good question, Ace. By the way, I think most of you know, Ace is a writer's writer. He is really a writer's writer. And although he is also one of the most outstanding writers in America, he's an even finer person.
This is all true. I won't go.
A real role model. Where's that 20? Really a role model. And I'm one of his big fans. The other thing about it is he is so generous in helping others, extremely generous when he is strapped for time. Anyway,
only people I like, Charlie. Only people I like. That's the truth.
I can't say enough about him. But writing a novel, when I wrote Confessions of an Undercover Agent, I wrote that not because all those stories were about me, is I finally realized after working for years that hardly any other undercover agents ever worked that long undercover or had those types of experiences. And I thought, that would be interesting for people regardless of who is in the center of that, who's doing undercover. So that's why I wrote Confessions of an Undercover Agent.
And it has maybe one of the greatest book covers I've ever seen. I remember you sent it to me. You said, I don't know about this. I'm not sure about this. You want to see how crazy Charlie Spiller's was in the 70s. You look at that cover and there will be no doubt.
Yeah.
That is a crazy wild man looking back at you.
I think you're right. And for all those people who said, gosh, you were so brave. I was just reckless. I was like that horse where the guy went to buy a racehorse to the farmer out in Kentucky, and the farmer said, get back, I'll show it to you. And it throws open the barn doors, and the horse races out, and he's like a streak. And the man's thinking, I want to buy that racehorse. About that time, the racehorse hits a tree head on, bam, and he flips over. He's knocked out, and he staggers back to his feet. And the man says, what do you want to buy? Mister, I don't want to buy that horse. That horse is blind. And the owner said, mister, that horse ain't blind. He just don't give a damn. So I think I'm kind of like that horse. I wasn't brave. I just didn't give a damn. More reckless than anything. The reason I wrote the novel was after I wrote Confessions, there were some cases I worked on that involved a lot of digging, intrigue, and I wanted to write about those, about how this little thing led to breaking this open, and this little thing led to that. And so I sat down and wrote the first novel in about 2 months. It just flowed out. Then it took about 2 years to fine tune it and whatever. So it flowed from that. And now, like Ace and I were talking before we came up here, he and I both we have so many stories we want to write.
Not
right?
stories.
I mean, really novels we want to write that we can't get to them. You got plots you want to write. I've got plots I want to write. We don't even have time to write all these novels we want to write. There's another thing about Flashpoint. Sometimes around town,
let's back up really quick. Just for people who don't know, tell us about Frank Marsh. Just who he is.
Yeah, Frank Marsh in Flashpoint, FBI agent, works counterterrorism cases.
He's a hero of these two books.
Yeah, he's a hero of these two books. He's an ex-Marine who fought in Iraq and was wounded, went through various things.
How old is he?
Probably mid-30s or so. And Kathy Foster is his paramour, and they live together. She's a staffer with the White House National Security Council, working on European affairs. And, I think this is in Flashpoint. It seems like it is, where she's given Frank a clue to something about, look, Marwan's involved in what you were talking about, the head of the Iranian Quds Force assassination unit 400, which is an actual unit with Quds Force. And he basically says, well, what do you mean? She says, parking lots. He said, parking lots? What do you mean parking lots? And she said, well, corporations in America, and this is all true, I try to weave in some things that are informative in my novels. Well, corporations sometimes do surveys of parking lots. There are parking lots, and that way they can judge how much business different outlets are doing. So Walmart or some other stores might sometimes do surveys of their parking lot in different ways to determine which stores are doing a lot of business. Some hospitals do the same thing to see if there's been an outbreak of disease or something. If all of a sudden there's a lot of people around emergency rooms. And she says, so when the satellites pass over in Tehran over the Quds Force headquarters, where Marwan is, we look for his vehicle in the satellite.
I'm going to stop you right there, being an old reporter. Tell us who Marwan is so we know who he is.
Oh, yeah. You're a fantastic journalist. And I was telling Ace that he needs a regular podcast. He really does. Yeah. I'll tell you, he is so remarkable. I'm thinking of changing my name to Charlie Atkins. Or Ace Spillers.
That sounds like both of them sound like a country and western singer right there. Especially
or Ace Spillers. So I was thinking about parking lot. She said, well, we looked for Marwan's vehicle when this happened over in Europe. In the early morning hours, we looked to see if Marwan's car was at Quds Force headquarters.
Would you call Marwan a terrorist or acting for the state? I guess he's acting.
Oh well, yeah, he's the head of a Quds Force unit.
Yeah, so not necessarily
assassination sabotage unit. And in Whirlwind, one of their plots in Whirlwind, the earlier book, was they were assassinating a dissident in Europe. Well, a few months after the book came out, that's what, sure enough, was in the news. So it wasn't that it was predicting. This is what those people.
He's
do.
not a good guy. I'm going to be
Not
a
a
spoiler
good
alert.
guy.
When we first meet him in this book, I mean, he drops a kid off the side of a damn building. I mean,
Yeah, throwing a kid into a river.
Ruthless.
I mean, yeah, you can tell who the bad guys are. So she says, well, we looked to see if Marwan's vehicle was there when this thing happened, at 2 o'clock in the morning in Europe, and it wasn't there. And he said, well, so it wasn't there. She said, but knowing that we sometimes watch him, Marwan uses different vehicles, but what we do is we watch his chauffeur's car, and his chauffeur's car was at headquarters then. So we know Marwan was there at that time, which helps. That's another link showing Quds Force was behind this thing we're looking at in Europe.
And Frank is looking for a larger conspiracy going on here.
Right.
It's headed to a big reveal. Can you give us just a little taste of maybe what Frank is looking? I'm not going to say what's going to happen, but what does Frank know, and what does he know that knows that there's a big bad event that right around the corner?
Looks like there's going to be a big bad terrorist event, maybe a weapons of mass destruction event in Europe, somewhere in Europe.
Well, you might have given it away on the cover.
I might have given it away on the cover. Yeah.
What is that? That's bold.
Yeah, this is a picture of Abbeville, Mississippi.
This is Paris, Mississippi, out by the.
I might have given away. By the way, I like that cover. I'd asked one of the artificial intelligence sites. I said, I want a cover with Eiffel Tower and explosion in the back, and it gave me a couple of samples. And then for the book designer, I sent her those samples, and then she sent this back, and I thought that's a great cover, very, very dramatic. Yeah, but there's some things that happen not only in Paris, but some other places in Europe. And anyway,
so
that's
we got Frank Marsh, FBI agent, former Marine.
Right.
Got Kathy, his love interest, but is also a very helpful part of the team. And then tell us about DeLuca. Which is my favorite. Maybe it's my favorite guy in the book.
A New York Police Department detective, what's his name, Rizzio DeLuca, and he is a bull. He's brash. In fact, I was thinking, gosh,
obviously Irish.
Oh yeah, Irish, and he's cussing all the time. And usually I try to stay away from that kind of language, but with him, you have to have that kind of language for him to.
You really do, because if anyone's ever spent any time with any cops, especially New York City cops, or for me, Boston cops, I mean, the F word is just part of the thing, and if you take it out, it's inauthentic. It's not to be it's not to shock anybody. But I thought it was some of the funniest lines came from DeLuca. I thought he was a great character.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that scene at the airport too. Whenever, don't let that go to your head, Mark. He's a good character. And another one with New York PD is Gabrielle Lemaire. A lot of people may not know the FBI stations legal attaches in a lot of foreign capitals. They're called legats. And their job is to pick up on things that might relate to terrorism back in the U.S. and also to help facilitate when we need to grab a fugitive and have that government get the fugitive back to the U.S., things like that. Having been involved in that in Iraq, those kind of things are extremely complicated. And something that might take a week in the United States could take 4 months overseas. Extremely complicated. But the FBI legats are in most capitals. But after 9/11, New York PD started stationing New York PD international liaison officers in some foreign capitals. And so this Gabrielle Lemaire is a New York PD liaison station in a foreign capital. And she gets involved in some things. And of course, there's clashes between the New York PD and the FBI over turf, those sort of things. All realistic when you know how things work.
Yeah.
All realistic when you know how things work. Anyway.
Well, when I was writing my books, when I would turn to things I was writing about the Dixie Mafia and whatever, I didn't want to be things I heard from movies. And that's the thing you find out a lot of times with crime fiction or thrillers is people recycle stuff. So the information I got from so much from confessions and then so much from John Heilman's book and At Midnight to Guntown really, that's where I turned to. And if I didn't know, I would call you guys and ask you guys questions. So who did you call to find out stuff about Iran? Because your experiences were in Iraq. So who were your people that you really were invaluable to find out about? Okay, how does this work? Who are the people that are running? Who are these guys running these teams?
When I was in Iraq, hello, are you there? Hello, my name is Johnny Cash. When I was in Iraq as the justice attaché, I worked on some things dealing with Iran. And one of the things dealing with Iran was someone named Doc Duke, who's in Whirlwind. In fact, I used his real name. He's in Whirlwind. And everything in Whirlwind about Doc Duke is true and factual. And he actually did the things in Whirlwind, that I write about. And one of the things that I did in Iraq, was trying to get Doc Duke transferred from Iraq custody back to the United States, or to keep him in custody in Iraq once he was finally captured. And that wound up being a marathon. He had organized and planned in Iraq an attack on a compound in Iraq where U.S. troops would visit periodically to do, just liaison. And on a certain day when a convoy of U.S. troops visited, all of a sudden about 5 of these big black armored SUVs drove up. Looked like they had American troops, American uniforms in it, but they were actually Iranians. And all this was planned by Doc Duke and others. And they came and they killed, I think one American, wounded some others, and they took, I believe it was either 4 captured, and they headed out driving as fast as they could toward Iran with the captive American soldiers. It looked like they weren't going to make it, so they stopped the vehicles and they murdered the 4 soldiers. And then they fled and disappeared. Doc Duke was later connected with that. And months later, he was captured in Basra by British Special Forces, and I think our CIA was involved too. Under the Status of Forces Agreement, we had to turn him over to the Iraqi government. And we had 19,000 prisoners in U.S. custody, and we were turning over about 2,000 each month to the Iraqi government. But we didn't want him turned over because we were afraid the Iraqi government would release him. So we kept asking the U.S. general in charge of the people being turned over not to turn him over. But every month his name would pop up on the list to be turned over. We'd rush and get back in touch with the FBI, and it would take a letter from an FBI director to the military in Iraq to stop that. But you couldn't do that just one time. It had to be done every time. And every month we'd scramble and we'd stop it at the last minute. Finally, we went to the Major General, U.S. Army General in charge, and we explained why Doc Duke couldn't be released. He was too much of a danger. He was considered that he had learned too much while he was in custody. So the general said, "I'll tell you what, he'll be the last one released." So after that, he never showed up on the list. And about a year later, there was only 1 prisoner in custody of U.S. forces in Iraq out of the 19,000. That was Doc Duke. Then Prime Minister Maliki, I was the justice attaché then, Maliki came over and met with Obama in the Oval Office for 2 days. And during that time, he had one request. He requested that Doc Duke be released to them. And a couple weeks later, with the Iraqis saying, "We'll prosecute him," he was turned over. And then about 4 months later, they released him saying there wasn't enough evidence. And of course, he went back to Iran. And while he was in custody, Hezbollah was trying to get him out because he's a Hezbollah operative that was coordinating with Iran. Iran was trying to get him out. The UN was investigating him about a big bombing back in Lebanon. So all this was going on. And I read, I think it was about a year and a half or 2 years ago, he was killed in an Israeli airstrike in the Golan Syrian Heights, where he was in charge of another group that was attacking Israel. So when I write about Iran, you know, I've got all this stuff to draw on, and I weave all that in. I'm sorry, I'm getting into the weeds with all these details. Anyway, I know some stuff. I know some stuff.
You know, Charlie, my experience, the weeds is where all the good stuff is. That's where you find all the good information and the good story stuff. I'm gonna, at this time, anyone have any questions out there from Mr. Spillers? Be glad to answer any questions here.
Or for Ace. Yeah, really.
No
You've been
questions.
working on some international stories and novels, haven't you?
I have been taking your lead. That's what we were talking about earlier. You know, always when we're sitting down, I always wish we had a microphone on us. So this is what's so great about it is today actually someone is taping us. I love that. But what about you guys? I know I've got other questions, but does anyone else have any questions? Let's talk about, go back to, as you guys are formulating your questions here, you know, again, writing a series and writing about, what is interesting to you about having a character like Frank Marsh? How did this come first, or did the story come first, and then you developed an FBI character, or did you have the idea of this FBI agent that was in the thick of it? What came first, the overall story or the character itself?
You know, that's a good question, and I don't remember. I don't remember. I don't remember which. Most of the time, your little story or outline kind of takes off, and then you try to fit a character into it.
Yeah.
You know, what kind of character? We were talking today, and I was talking about somebody getting out of prison. I had no idea what kind of character. All of a sudden, he's getting out of prison, and he's sitting down eating, and these things are happening. And as those things are happening, I'm writing. I don't know where it's going, but I have to have a name for it. And then I start having to have a background for it. And I have to start kind of making an outline, what kind of guy he is, where he came from. All those things start kind of fitting in. Do you do it in a different way? How do you do it, Ace?
I usually start, I think, kind of in a different way. The characters come first for me, and so I have an idea of who you know, it's kind of like a cast. Right. Saying before a play, I know who my central players are, and I know their backgrounds, I know all about them, and then I'll decide what the story is going to be to have them in it. That's just kind of the way I like to work. But they evolve, they change. The story bends often. Sometimes I think I've got an ironclad way of telling the story. What took you so long, though, Charlie, when you talked about, you wrote it very quickly, the first book, and then you said it took a few years to get it straight. What was the hardest thing for you when you were trying to write the novel? You laid it down quickly, but what was the hard part that took years to fix it? What was that?
Oh, sure. All the, you know, getting everything fine-tuned about the punctuation, the grammar, and what takes place first, and what sequence and what parts don't quite work together, and how you get them to work together. Yeah, that story just flowed. I mean, that was done in 2 months, 2.5 months. And like I say, it took about 2 years of fine-tuning to get that done. I thought the very next book was Flashpoint. I thought that would be out pretty quickly, but heck, Flashpoint wound up taking what, 6 years or
It's
so?
been a long time.
Now, yeah, and I was telling Ace, now something different though is I've got 2 other books that I've been writing. One's a Vietnam memoir, and it's about 99% done. And I've got a separate novel, totally unrelated to the Frank Marsh novels, called The Last Time I Saw Nick. And that's about 98% done.
What's harder for you, Charlie? Is it harder to dig back into your memories and to find the stuff, or is that tougher for you to do, or is it, you know, some people might think it's easier because you've had these experiences, but I would think it would be harder to put down your experiences on paper.
Well, actually, for me, it's easier because all I have to do is, like Frank Marsh in the bushes, or later, he sees somebody shooting at him and grasshoppers are kicking dirt up. Yeah. All I have to remember is Vietnam bullets kicking dirt up and me thinking it's grasshoppers, and I just write that, and so bam, I'm on it. Yeah. For me, though, the Vietnam memoir has been hard to write. I had an easy war compared to others, but still, to write it, not only what happened, but how it impacts you. To write it, you have to live in it. So in the mornings and sometimes late at night, I'm at the computer, I'm writing it, and I'm living it. And I'm in Vietnam. I'm not here. I'm not in Oxford. I'm living in Vietnam. And I'm seeing, feeling, everything impacting because I have to write it. And even when I stop writing around the house, I could be preoccupied thinking about it. So I've already written the acknowledgments of the Vietnam book, and as part of the acknowledgments, I thank my wife Evelyn because I explained, you know, I have to live in both worlds, and sometimes I'm preoccupied, and I thank her for the grace of allowing me to be present in both worlds when I was writing it. And as I've told a potential publisher, I want to be done with the book because it's wearing me out, it's beating me down. I don't want to be there. I'm tired of being there. I want to get out of there. So I'm ready to be rid of it, finish that book and send it off and get on to the novels, which are fun. Yeah, which are fun. You mean some crime lords are chasing me and they got machine guns and oh my gosh, oh, that's all the fun stuff. And we're fleeing through the swamps.
Charlie, where'd you grow up?
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up all over the damn place, but mainly from Alabama, but I've lived all over the place.
Yeah, well, I live in the same place.
Did you same way? Military, family?
No, oil patch.
Yeah.
Since my dad worked in the oil patch, whether we needed to or not, when I was growing up, we moved every 3 years or so.
Yep, same with
So
me.
every 3 years, it was a new town, new school, people I never met,
Yep.
walking into a new class in the middle of the school year in South Mississippi and in Louisiana. And so basically that's where I grew up.
Where were you living when you joined the Marines?
McGee, Mississippi. And by the way, I was living in McGee, and while I was over in Vietnam, my parents moved. And they moved to Baton Rouge. And when I got out, I got in late at night from Vietnam, you know, and I'm flying into New Orleans, and I wind up taking a cab and around Baton Rouge, outskirts of Baton Rouge, and I go up to a house I've never been to before, and I ring the doorbell. Late at night, one of my sisters answered the door, and all of a sudden I'm home from Vietnam, that sort of thing. So sometimes you have to catch up with your own family.
And were you home for Vietnam when you did that, or were you?
No, I was home. I was out. I was home.
What year was that?
Oh gosh, what year were you born?
1970.
Yeah, that was late 1966.
Okay.
Late
All right.
1966. So, and the good thing about it is I didn't run into a lot of protests where people actually were protesting against the military, mainly because when I came back, heck, you just came back and went straight home. No one really knew.
And then how long was it before you got into MBI and law enforcement?
NBN? Oh, I was joined Baton Rouge Police Department about a year after that, and then MBN after that. Anyway, it's just missing the excitement, I guess.
All right, the
and
windows
sense of mission.
windows closing here for any more questions for Mr. Spillers. If not, I know he's going to enjoy signing some books. But people in this business always ask you, Richard Howarth knows this, you always ask about comps. Well, what's this book like? You know, and that's the question. I've been doing this 25 years, and people say, well, what's the book like? And I said, well, it's like an Ace Atkins novel. I don't know what to tell you. But even though I've been doing this for 25 years, people want comps, and it's just kind of a comp. So I'd say good comps for you. I think a lot about the realism and the detail that you put in this book. This isn't just you. We could go on talking about fakery and bad stuff in both film and in books or TV shows that don't get law enforcement right. But you have all these great procedural details. So I think people who like Robert Ludlum, I think Tom Clancy, they're all going to be, those people are really going to enjoy your book. So for booksellers that are here tonight, I think those are some really good comps for the book, because you take us not just in a fictional way, you're taking us added with a lot of spot on information and a lot of detail that people enjoy to read. So.
See what I mean about Ace Atkins being a great guy. I mean, really a great guy. And I apologize to everybody. I've been on the road to Mississippi State Vet Center for 6 days in a row. And I think that's kind of got my mind numb, and my mind's not thinking so clearly. So I'm probably a bit road tired, but it's a pleasure to be here, and you invigorate me and inspire me. And I'm looking forward to going home and going to bed every
I
day.
bet. Well, I'm not going to let you get to signing books. Charlie, thanks so much for sharing your stories. Thanks, buddy.
You're the man.
Oh, I enjoy it always.
Charlie, you did a great job, and Ace, you need to work that square book.
Hey, if I don't get another book, hey.
I thought he did. I thought he does.